In today's episode of Ordinary People Podcast, we're going to discuss whether Colin Kaepernick should kneel or stand for the national anthem. Also, we're going to discuss President Donald Trump's statement towards NFL players and NBA players who choose to also demonstrate this type of protest. We're going to discuss that and much more in this episode of the Ordinary People Podcast. Welcome to Ordinary People Podcast, where it's not about likes and views. It's about inspiring, motivating, and informing you. We got a packed show today. But before we get to the show at hand, I need to open this up with a statement. A point I need to make before I speak on the subject of today's show. Now, I know by now many of you had already clicked on today's show because you probably read the title of the show and are interested to hear what I have to say about the subject at hand. So before I get into the subject at hand and my opinion on the subject, I first must give my statement on something else. I want to talk about the military for a second. Now, due to the protest that's going on in the NFL and now around the leagues, as far as baseball, basketball, football, it's been a narrative that's been created that the kneeling for the national anthem has been a direct sign of disrespect towards our military. So with that being said, let me speak on the military for a second before I get into my opinion on the subject. You're not going to meet too many people who have more respect for the military than me. Background on what respect and why I have respect for the military, let me give it to you and let me explain. Several of my uncles were a part of the military. They served in the United States Army. Not only I have respect because several of my relatives served in the United States Army, but I have a profound respect due to the history of the United States Army, to the fact that the United States Army, the Navy, Coast Guard, and every Air Force in every aspect of the United States Division of Army, with their work and their bravery, have done for us to enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy today. And what I mean by that is, I look back at World War I and the sacrifices and the bravery that they had to make sure that we weren't steering and living in a place that's full of evil. Think about World War II, when the world's freedom was at jeopardy. And the bravery of our soldiers, of our Air Force, our Navy, the bravery of them in the fighting for them to preserve our freedoms cannot be overlooked. Cannot be underappreciated. See, me, I'm a history buff. I research history as a hobby. Now, some of you may not understand all the aspects of World War I or World War II and how we were on not only the brink of evil taking over the world, but we were so close to all, and I don't mean as a nation, but as a world, losing the freedoms, the rights that we all enjoy today. And I urge you to look into these things. When you think about the Korean War, the Vietnam War, no matter what war and where your stance on a war, whether you agree with the war happening or not, at the end of the day, I think as all solidarity, we can stand and say we're appreciative to the bravery that our soldiers have shown when they go out here and lay their lives on line, when they put their families' lives and their future on line to protect our rights, the freedoms that we all enjoy every day. I felt the need to speak on that and to make that very clear that the Ordinary People Podcast, as well as many other people out here listening and supporters of Ordinary People Podcast, share the same point of view as I do when I say we are very thankful for our Army and our armed forces, for not only what they do today, but what they have always done, and to protecting our freedom and our rights. Now that we got that off, let's talk about our freedom. Let's talk about our rights. Let's talk about the freedoms and the rights that our armed forces fight for. Let's talk about the issues that we're facing in this country. Let's talk about the subject that we're dealing with. I want to start this off with a simple word, narrative. I want y'all to think about that. The word narrative is what I want to start this podcast off on. See, a narrative is what we're focusing on right now as people. When we're dealing with this Colin Kaepernick situation, when we're dealing with this protest, we're focused on narrative. Now, what is the narrative, people? The narrative is this, that Colin Kaepernick's form of protest is disrespectful to the armed forces and those who served in protecting our rights and our freedoms. He's disrespecting our country. He's disrespecting our flag. And due to his disrespect, he shall be punished. He should be punished as so, that he should not be allowed to have a job in the NFL. That's the narrative that's being discussed. Now, this narrative has expanded over the last 24 hours. This narrative have grew to our current president speaking out against anyone who stands in solidarity with Colin Kaepernick and his protests, stating that anyone in the NFL or NBA who chooses to use this form of protest, who in his words choose to disrespect the flag by kneeling or not standing for the national anthem, should be fired, kicked out of the league, forced to get off the field. See, me personally, the word fire hits a home for me. It's home in certain aspects because, see, we started about talking about the Navy and the sacrifices that our armed forces have made and the sacrifices that their family have made with their husbands, wives, going out, sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, going out here and putting their lives on line to protect the rights of others. And not to compare in no such way protesters to the armed forces, because there is no comparison to what these armed forces do. But isn't it true that these armed forces are fighting for rights, and one of those rights is freedom to speech, freedom to protest, freedom to express ourselves? Isn't that right that these armed forces lay down their lives for and put their lives on the line, their family's future on the line for, to protect those rights? Isn't it the duty of the office of presidency to set an example not only for our country but for the whole free world, to set a precedence for that? So I have several issues. Now, the subject at hand here is, should Colin Kaepernick stand or should he kneel for the national anthem? Now, I may lose some subscribers after I do this podcast. I might lose some friends. I might lose some supporters. I may gain some. But understand, me doing this podcast is not about gains or losses for me. It's not about personal gains and losses. It's about carrying on my duty of informing you. And that's what I plan on doing with this podcast. It's further informing you on not to focus on the narrative and on the problem. See, because the narrative of the situation with the Colin Kaepernick protest is that he's disrespecting the flag. That he's disrespecting the flag and he's disrespecting the armed forces who fight for our country. But what is the reason for the protest? The reason for him protesting is to stand up and bring awareness to social injustice. Social injustice meaning African Americans, men, women, who are being murdered and killed by police officers. Now, are we now taking a turn to say that all police officers are bad? Because, see, that's the other narrative that comes into play whenever we broach the subject. Is that, oh, now we're saying that all police officers are bad. That's not what we're saying. That's not what this podcast is saying. But we can address that narrative right there. So let's get into it. Not all police officers are bad. Just like not all African Americans who wear a hoodie or baggy jeans are bad. However, to state that there is no police officers who put on their uniform, go out with the intentions of doing harm to others, would be untruthful if we act like that doesn't exist. And if the problem exists where we have people or a group or several officers who put on a uniform that's supposed to stand for serving, protecting the community as a whole, not an individual group, ethnicity, or gender, but community as a whole. And we have a few of them who are going out here with the intentions other than serving and protecting. We have a problem. We have a problem, people. We have a serious problem. And we need to hold accountable those officers who are going out here and committing these atrocities. There needs to be accountability for that. But see, when Colin Kaepernick protests to bring light to this situation, the media and groups of people choose to focus on a narrative, which is he's disrespecting the flag. He's disrespecting armed forces. And the voice of him disrespecting the armed forces or the flag has spoken much louder and has drawn more attention than the social injustices that a group of people are facing. Now, when I mention this to several of my Caucasian counterpartners, because I have conversations with them about this very subject, several things happen. One, I had people say to me, well, more Caucasians are killed by police officers than African Americans. Okay, if that's true, let's just touch on that for a second. If that's true, then you should be standing in solidarity. Because no one, despite their race, gender, should have to worry about losing their lives by a police officer. Now, if you're coming out with a police officer with a knife, a gun, then I can understand a police officer using excessive force, because that police officer also puts his life on the line every time he steps out the door. And he has to protect himself as well, or she has to protect herself. And they have to assure that they too can make it home after their shift. They have a family they have to make it back to. So we're not sitting here saying that police officers are supposed to allow a person to harm them. But their first choice of action should not be to use excessive force. So when the officers who choose to use that as their first line of defense needs to be either trained or outrooted. They need to be uprooted. They need to be uprooted for the simple fact that they may be causing a problem or issue that's casting a bad light on other officers who are just simply coming out here doing their job, just trying to serve and protect the community, just trying to protect the people who can't protect themselves. And for those officers who are out here, who have other things on their minds, who have other intentions on their heart, we're in need for them to be addressed. And what we mean by addressed is we don't mean to be fired. Maybe just a conversation with them. See, people underestimate the value of informing and educating people. And sometimes people just don't know. And when I mean people just don't know, I'm not talking about the fact of killing unarmed people. I'm not talking about that. Sometimes people don't know how to deal with a person, who are not used to encountering a certain person or a certain race or a certain group. And sometimes just taking the time to educate them can make the world of a difference. It can save someone's life. Don't ever underestimate conversation. Now, the same as we talk about police officers who are doing wrong in the community and how we need to shine light on those people. There's people, African Americans in communities, who need the light shined on them as well. That's out here robbing people. Have bad intentions not only to the people that's in their community, but to the officers who serve the community. And that needs to be addressed too. And that don't need to just be addressed on the sole responsibility of police, but the people who live in those communities, the people who know those group of people who are looking to do ill attention to not only officers, but people of their community. See, the gap needs to be bridged between society and the African American community and the police department. But when you ask him, should Colin Kaepernick stand or kneel, getting back to the subject, my opinion is he should stand. And what do I mean by stand? Do I mean stand for the national anthem? Or do I mean stand up for the protest, to fight back against injustice? I mean stand up for a protest. Stand on your morals. Stand on your ground. Stand for what you believe in. Don't fall victim to the pressure of the outside world and society's opinion and what they choose and they feel is wrong or not wrong. I feel like Colin Kaepernick should continue to kneel. I think he should stand his ground. And yes, I think others should bring awareness to this as well. Some may say, well, he should do it on social media, but that's been tried. Maybe he should march down the street, but that's been tried. Maybe there's another way that he could protest to get his point across and to bring light to social injustice other than kneeling for the national anthem. So in that regards, when people say it to me, I have one simple response. What solution do you recommend? What's your suggestion to bringing light to social injustice? See, the problem is with most people, they want to be comfortable in a protest. They want the protest to happen, but happen in a form that makes them feel comfortable, that doesn't affect their lives. Because see, that's what it's ultimately about, right? It's about our personal lives and the ability not to affect our personal lives, affect the course of our lives going, to not hinder us, to not make us feel uncomfortable. Because it's not about the problem for most people, it's about the problem not affecting us. In their lives, the issue. Because my situation is so comfortable, and right now, social injustice doesn't affect me, I don't want to hear about protest. I don't want to see protests. I don't want the protest to affect my commute to work. I don't want the protest to affect my ability to come on Sunday afternoon to watch sports or to watch a basketball game. I don't want to have to deal with that because, see, that affects my routine. And that's where most people's mindset is. The issue is not so much with Colin Kaepernick. The issue is not so much with the stance on the national anthem, but for most people it's about the ability of it affecting their day, their routine, the smoothness as their day go. See, we spoke on that multiple times on this podcast. So if you're a long-term listener to this podcast, you know that we have broached that subject before of things not affecting you today, but affecting you tomorrow. And what do I mean by not affecting you today, but affecting you tomorrow? I always use this metaphor. You're standing on a mountain and there's a flood in the villages below. As you're standing on the peak of that mountain, you may look down at that flood and think to yourself, I don't need to do anything to stop that flood because I'm safe at the top of this peak of this mountain. So why do I need to worry about the flood that's affecting all these people that live in the village below? But what you don't realize is, as majority of people live in that village below, they're dying off from this flood. As the flood continues to rise to the top of that mountain, eventually it's going to land on your doorstep. The only problem is, when that flood lands on your doorstep, it's going to be too late to try to do something about it. Now, many of you might say it's bad taste considering all that's happening in the world, all the hurricanes and such that's happening in the world. But I say it's a perfect metaphor to speak on in its current situation. Because even with that going on, we need to find solidarity to be able to help people who are in need. We need to step out and stop worrying about our comfortability to reach out to help people who are affected by hurricane and floods in Houston, Texas, in Puerto Rico, in the other Caribbean islands, in Miami, in Florida. We need to interrupt our regular scheduled program, take a detour to assist others. But how many of us are willing to do that? How many of us are so wrapped up in the narrative of why Colin Kaepernick is kneeling that we can't see the problem that's affecting us? That we can't seek out a solution to the issue? How many of us are right now today okay with the president basically threatening to fire majority of the NFL? So you're not okay with Colin Kaepernick interrupting your regularly scheduled program, but you're okay with the president eliminating it. Because when you delete 70 to 80% of the league, which is African American, maybe more, maybe less, what kind of product do you have? Do you have enough to fill the teams? Do you have enough players to play the game? So you got to sit back and think. How long are we going to sit here and ignore the problem of social injustice and focus on the narratives that the media and that people choose to put in our face? How long are we going to keep those colored glasses on our eyes so that we don't have to see the truth that lies right in front of us? How long is it going to be before we start holding people as a whole and accountable for their actions? Hold the people who are in return holding us back from moving forward, from finding a solution to racism, to finding a solution to injustices that many groups face. At what point are we going to stand for something and stop falling for anything? At what point are we going to stop believing the lies? At what point are we going to stop living with this comfortability that we can focus on narrative, we can ignore the problems that certain groups are feeling? At what point are we going to become human beings again? What point are we going to do that? Start becoming human beings again and start thinking about how other human beings are feeling, how they are affected by these actions, these atrocities that are happening. At what point are we going to regain trust in the law enforcement that is supposed to serve and protect us? At what point are we going to stop living by these lines that's drawn? See, someone once told me when I talked about bringing the subject up that, you're going to have to take a side. You're going to have to choose a side. Are you with Colin Kaepernick or are you not? See, that's the problem. Once again, we talk about narrative. See, there's this false belief that there has to be division, that there has to be a side. Either you're with him or you're not. When the reality is, let me tell you what the true definition of what that lines draw. It's either you're okay with social injustice or you're not okay with social injustice. You're okay with the status quo and the way things have always been in this country, or you're not okay with this country. And for those who are okay with it, your line has been drawn. You're that person who's sitting on top of that mountain just waiting for it, just waiting for that problem to hit your doorstep and to become an issue that you no longer can hide from anymore. See, you don't have to be an African American to understand that social injustice is wrong. Now, I talked about World War II when I started this off. I talked about our armed forces fighting to protect the rights of not only our country, but the other worlds, and in particular, a certain group that was discriminated against. It was trying to be exterminated, and that's the Jewish community. For you who are not educated on World War II, let me give you a brief education of what happened during World War II. The Nazi, which was an evil regime, was kidnapping, imprisoning Jewish families for not doing anything wrong other than being of a certain descent in religion, and exterminating kids, mothers, women, stealing all their money, their property. They were exterminating them. I don't have to be Jewish to know what was happening to them was wrong. To know that what was happening to them is wrong. To feel the hurt of what happened to them. To be able to see those pictures and know it's wrong and feel hurt in my heart. I don't have to be Jewish to understand that that was wrong. So do you have to be an African American to understand when you're seeing pictures, videos of another African American being murdered, unarmed, for doing nothing wrong, being murdered? Do you have to be an African American to understand that's wrong? I know particularly I didn't have to look at and need someone to tell me or have to be Jewish to understand what was happening to the Jewish community was wrong, was unacceptable. It should never happen. Those people should never perish, should never have had that to happen. That should not be a part of history as a whole. But it happened. And my heart still hurts for the people who were affected by it, who are still affected by it, to families who lost mothers, children, due to hate. Due to one person's hate. It was wrong. But I don't have to be Jewish. So why do you have to be an African American to understand the things that happened and is happening in this country is wrong? Slavery was wrong. The murdering of African Americans are wrong. It's time for y'all to wake up, people. It's time for y'all to wake up. Become human beings again. And recognize what's happening in front of you. Hold people accountable. It's time for us to hold our president accountable for his actions, for his words, his choice of words, his choice to continue to demonstrate the wrong type of behavior, to use the wrong type of words in the position that he stands in. And this is not to bring political into this. This is not to speak on the president because I may not support or vote for him. The point is, I support who was ever in office because whoever's in office, regardless of my personal feelings and beliefs, he still represents me, you, and all of us. So what I have to do, I have to support him in hopes that he represents me and you and all my audience and all my friends, family, and enemies in a proper light, that he supports and represents this country and this world in a proper light, that he pushes it in the right way. But when you're speaking on segregating, when you know the history of segregation, when you know there was never, segregation has never turned to anything great, has never made any country, any place, anything great. When you choose to focus and to use that and speak on that as if that's okay, I'm not all right with that, and you shouldn't be okay with that. You shouldn't applaud that. We see what segregation got you. And for y'all who are out there who are listening to this, think segregation was helpful, show me where in the world, in which way. I would love to be educated where you can show me where segregation was of good use to this country or any country. We spoke on the Jewish community and what happened to them, the atrocities that happened to them during World War II. You telling me that the extermination of an entire race, of a group was okay? It wasn't okay. There's no way you can ever, and any person can justify what happened to them. It's no way you can ever justify slavery. The killing of unarmed African Americans. There's no way. But you have something against anybody who's standing against this. And you feel this man should be blackballed because he's standing and saying it's not okay, because he's standing up against the evil that's happening, because he's standing up against the problems that we're dealing with. And you feel he should be blackballed because he's interrupting your day, because he's making you choose to see all the things you tried to ignore. People, whether you want to accept it or not, whether you want to believe it or not, whether you want to ignore it or not, I'm here to tell you, social injustice does exist. And with saying that, I'm not saying every officer is bad. Majority of the police officers who put a uniform on and go out here and get on the beat and do their job are good officers, are good people who are only doing their job, which is to serve and to protect the communities that they work in. But even still, there's always a few bad apples. There's a few people in the African American community who are out there putting on hoodies, who wake up, put their shoes on, their clothes on, and go out the house with the intentions of to harm and do and hurt and take from other people. But there's a majority of the African American community who just get their clothes on, go out, and just trying to provide for their family, their children, and to give a better life to their family and their community. So within that being said, I agree that Colin Kaepernick should continue to push on the protest, and that more and more people should stand in solidarity with the fight against social injustice. Even if you disagree with his stance and his choice on how to protest, what you should agree on is that we need to stop focusing on narrative and recognize what the problem is within this country, within racism and social injustice. And it's time for us to fight back, to put an end to it. The time is now. The time has ended when we can sit here and ignore and act like things don't exist. The problem exists. It exists. So what are you going to do about it? That's the question I have for you. I want to thank y'all for listening to another episode of the Ordinary People Podcast. I'm Alan the Great, and this has been an Extraordinary Opinion segment. Thank you for listening. Peace. We'd like to thank you all again for listening to another episode of the Ordinary People Podcast Extraordinary Opinion segment, where it's not about likes and views, but inspiring, motivating, and informing you. As always, we encourage you to like, share, comment on the video. Give me your thoughts on this video as well as others. Give me your opinion. If you don't feel comfortable doing it that way, you can always email me, ordinarypeoplepodcast, number 16 at gmail.com. Also, subscribe to my channel, Alan the Great, on YouTube, so that you will always be in the loop on new episodes being uploaded. Also, if you ever have an idea of a show, please don't hesitate to email me, ordinarypeoplepodcast, number 16 at gmail.com. We want to thank you again for listening and being a part of another extraordinary episode. Peace.